Let me discuss something that's been creating enormous excitement recently, and frankly, it's one of those endeavors that split audiences right from the initial reveal. I'm referring to the live-action rendition of Moana, the cherished 2016 Disney animated picture that won over audiences globally through its breathtaking imagery, remarkable soundtrack, and a narrative deeply embedded in Polynesian legend and tradition. Before we plunge into all the details surrounding this production, the performers, the narrative, the filmmaking process, the technical brilliance, and whether it truly works, allow me to establish some background first. This isn't merely another Disney live-action redo. This particular project carries significance. It holds deep meaning for countless individuals across numerous dimensions, and grasping that framework will make our entire conversation much more rewarding. The fundamental storyline of the live-action Moana adheres to the identical foundational narrative as the animated predecessor, yet includes notable expansions and modifications that elevate it beyond a mere frame-by-frame recreation. At its essence, this remains the tale of a young Polynesian woman named Moana Waialiki, daughter of the chief on the island of Motunui, who experiences a profound, nearly mystical bond with the sea. Her homeland is deteriorating, coconuts are rotting, fish are vanishing from the surrounding reef, and harvests are declining. The island's provisions are shrinking, and the community grows increasingly anxious. Moana's grandmother Tala discloses that the demigod Maui once took the heart of Te Fiti, the island deity who brought forth all existence, and that this transgression released a creeping darkness across the waters, contaminating everything in its path. The sole method to rescue her island, her community, and ultimately the whole ocean is for someone to venture past the reef, locate Maui, and deliver the heart of Te Fiti back to its proper resting place. That captures the animated picture storyline in brief, and the live-action interpretation preserves that framework. But here's where matters become compelling. The live-action rendition builds upon the universe in manners that the animated picture simply couldn't accommodate within its duration. We're granted extended time among the inhabitants of Motunui. We observe their everyday existence with heightened specificity. The fishing expeditions, the agricultural work, the communal assemblies, the oral traditions that unite them as a people. The picture invests heavily in demonstrating why this particular island holds importance, why these specific individuals hold importance, and why Moana's choice to depart carries such enormous weight. This isn't simply a young woman embarking on a quest. It's a young woman challenging generations of established custom, putting everything familiar at stake, driven by her conviction that something greater exists beyond the horizon, something capable of delivering everyone she cherishes. The broadened universe construction additionally provides us with a richer examination of the mythology supporting the narrative. The animated picture addressed Polynesian mythology in gorgeous yet inevitably condensed fashion. The live-action interpretation ventures much deeper. We discover additional layers about Te Fiti and her symbolic significance, not merely as a narrative mechanism, but as a philosophical and spiritual concept. The notion that earth, sea, sky, and every living creature exist in interconnection, that inflicting damage upon any single strand of that web sends tremors through the entire system. It conveys an ecological statement, certainly, but it simultaneously communicates something profoundly sacred, and the picture approaches it with the solemnity it warrants. Let's examine the central characters, since this is genuinely where the picture either thrives or collapses. Moana herself represents the emotional center and driving force of the narrative, and selecting the right actress was arguably the single most consequential choice the creative team faced. Catherine Laga'aia, a young Australian performer of Samoan heritage, assumes the part, and honestly, from her initial appearance on screen, you sense the tremendous responsibility she bears, both within the character and as the performer chosen to realize this treasured character through a different artistic form. Laga'aia introduces a naturalistic quality to Moana that distinguishes her from the animated portrayal. Auli'i Cravalho's vocal work in the original was legendary, radiating warmth, resolve, and a sense of discovery. Laga'aia captures those same attributes while contributing something fresh, a corporeal authenticity that anchors the character in tangible reality. When she positions herself at the reef's boundary, surveying the boundless sea, the internal struggle registers visibly in her gaze. The deep desire to venture onward, counterbalanced by apprehension toward the unfamiliar and the burden of her father's hopes. Regarding her father, Chief Tui is portrayed by Temuera Morrison in this rendition, and this casting decision is absolutely inspired. Morrison, whom many will recognize from his contributions to the Star Wars universe, Jango Fett, Boba Fett, and the landmark New Zealand drama Once Were Warriors, infuses Chief Tui with a commanding presence that raises the character well beyond what the animated portrayal accomplished. In the animated picture, Tui came across as somewhat singular in dimension, the shielding father who prohibits his daughter from sailing past the reef. His reasoning was comprehensible, yet he functioned primarily as a barrier for Moana to surmount. Morrison's interpretation of Tui feels markedly different. The anguish is readable in his expression when he instructs Moana to remain on the island. You comprehend that his apprehension isn't without cause. The ocean claimed someone from him, his closest companion, his dear friend, someone he held precious. That devastating loss wounded him so profoundly that he constructed barriers around both his emotions and his island, pledging that nobody else would endure identical suffering. There exists a scene positioned early in the picture, and this represents one of the additions that genuinely distinguishes the live-action interpretation, where we actually witness a youthful Tui making his own attempt to navigate beyond the reef. In the animated picture, this detail was referenced but never depicted. In this version, we experience it firsthand. We observe the eagerness illuminating his features, the fierce determination, the exhilaration of unrestricted waters. Then we witness the tempest arriving. We see the massive wave that overturns his vessel. We watch him straining toward his companion, their fingers nearly connecting before the undertow rips them from each other. And we observe him dragging himself onto Motunui's beach, shattered, fighting for breath, utterly alone. It's a gut-wrenching sequence, and it fundamentally reframes every action Tui takes throughout the remainder of the picture. He isn't a villain. He barely qualifies as an antagonist in the conventional sense. He's a man left traumatized by the ocean who desperately strives to shield his daughter from an identical destiny. Morrison executes this with such understated ferocity that empathizing with him becomes unavoidable, even while you're pulling for Moana to venture forth. Grandma Tala, brought to life by the magnificent Rachel House, stands out as another remarkable present. House, a New Zealand performer of Maori heritage who has collaborated extensively with Taika Waititi and maintained a prominent position within New Zealand cinema for many years, carries an otherworldly essence into Tala that resists simple categorization. She possesses wisdom without delivering sermons. She exhibits eccentricity without descending into caricature. A gleam inhabits her eyes, suggesting she comprehends far beyond what she reveals, and her connection with Moana forms the emotional foundation of the opening act. The exchanges between Laga'aia and House rank among the most gentle and affecting in the complete picture. When Tala moves gracefully along the shore at twilight, her manta ray tattoo seemingly alive with her motion, and shares with Moana the tales of the sea and the ancient navigators, the gravity of ancestral wisdom transferring across generations becomes palpable. It's exquisite, representing precisely those instances that clarify why Disney committed to producing this picture originally. Now, let's address the prominent one. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson returns to embody Maui, and I recognize this casting selection sparked the greatest volume of dialogue. In the animated picture, Johnson provided Maui's voice, and the character was conceived as an outsized, metamorphosing demigod, wielding an enchanted fishhook and possessing self-regard rivaling a modest archipelago. Translating that character into live action presented distinctive obstacles. How does one render a character who can morph into a hawk, a shark, a beetle, and numerous other beings feel authentic within a live-action framework? How does one manage the animated tattoo of Mini Maui, functioning as the demigod's moral compass throughout the picture? And how does one convey the physical scale of a demigod who, per Polynesian tradition, literally hauled land masses up from the depths? The solution, evidently, involves a fusion of practical techniques, computer-generated imagery, and Johnson's substantial screen magnetism. And candidly, I'll acknowledge this constitutes one of the aspects where the picture will polarize viewers. Johnson doesn't represent a conventional performer in the sense of vanishing completely into characters. The awareness that you're observing the Rock never fully dissipates. He delivers his charisma, his comedic sensibility, his imposing physicality, yet an unmistakable element of Dwayne Johnson persists throughout. For certain viewers, that will present difficulties. They desire Maui rather than the Rock inhabiting Maui. For others, and I suspect this encompasses the majority of the viewership, Johnson's gravitational star quality is precisely what the part demands. Maui is designed to be irresistible. He's engineered to dominate the frame. He's constructed as the variety of character that commands your attention relentlessly, even during his most exasperating moments. Johnson fulfills that mandate convincingly. The interplay between Moana and Maui serves as the propulsive mechanism driving the picture's middle section, and it's precisely here that the rapport between Laga'aia and Johnson becomes critically important. In the animated picture, the connection between Moana and Maui followed a reasonably conventional buddy comedy progression. They commence at cross purposes, incrementally develop mutual admiration, and ultimately establish an authentic bond. The live-action interpretation traces the identical trajectory while introducing additional emotional texture to their exchanges. There's a moment aboard the vessel, positioned somewhere within the second act, where Maui releases his facade momentarily and confides to Moana about being discarded by his human parents. In the animated rendition, this constituted a comparatively condensed beat. Here, it receives the space necessary to resonate fully. Johnson portrays it with an exposed sensitivity that surfaces infrequently in his body of work, and Laga'aia's response, conveying not sympathy but genuine comprehension, a recognition of parallel pain, hits precisely the correct register. It marks the juncture where their dynamic transforms from grudging collaboration to authentic companionship, and the transformation earns its emotional weight through organic development. Allow me to step back somewhat and examine the creation of this picture, since the behind-the-curtain narrative proves nearly as captivating as the movie proper. The director helming the live-action Moana is Thomas Kail, recognized predominantly for staging the original Broadway mounting of Hamilton. Initially, that selection might appear unconventional for a Disney live-action epic, yet upon reflection, it possesses a particular internal logic. Kail comprehends grand presentation. He grasps the mechanics of orchestrating expansive musical sequences. He understands tempo and momentum and the delicate equilibrium between personal character exchanges and sweeping monumental production pieces. And conceivably most critically, he appreciates the necessity of cultural precision in narrative construction. Hamilton reconceived the American origin story through a prism of diverse casting and hip-hop vernacular. Moana demands genuine embodiment of Polynesian heritage. Kail, to his considerable credit, appears to have engaged with this undertaking, carrying profound deference and genuine eagerness to absorb knowledge. The screenplay emerged from the collaborative efforts of Jared Bush, who co-authored the original animated picture, alongside Dana Ledoux Miller, a Samoan-American writer who contributed an essential insider viewpoint to the source material. Including Ledoux Miller within the writing collective represented a pivotal determination, and her imprint registers throughout the screenplay. Dialogue possesses an unforced quality. Cultural allusions feel genuine rather than calculated. Comedy springs from personality and circumstance rather than from reductive characterizations or cultural misreadings. And the emotional through lines resonate more powerfully because they're rooted in legitimate familiarity with the customs and principles that the narrative draws upon. The determination to create this picture formed part of Disney's continuing initiative of converting their animated treasures into live-action presentations. We've witnessed this approach with Beauty and the Beast, The Lion King, Aladdin, The Little Mermaid, Mulan, and additional titles. The outcomes have been uneven, to characterize them diplomatically. Certain entries proved commercially robust, while disappointing critics. Others succeeded in validating their creation by delivering something authentically novel or by enriching the source narrative in substantive fashion. The live-action Moana, in my assessment, belongs within the second grouping, or at minimum aspires toward it. Whether it completely delivers represents a matter we'll address subsequently. The picture was produced by Lin-Manuel Miranda, indeed Hamilton's architect, who additionally composed the musical numbers for the original animated Moana, together with Osnat Shura, who produced the animated picture, and Auli'i Cravalho, who gave Moana her voice in the original and functions as an executive producer on this occasion, positioning Cravalho in a creative oversight capacity rather than performing before the camera reflected a considerate approach. It communicates that the picture endeavors to preserve connections with the original, while creating room for a fresh interpretation. Cravalho has expressed publicly the significance she placed on championing the successor Moana rather than positioning herself in rivalry, and that magnanimous disposition appears to have permeated the entire creative process. The picture was captured predominantly across multiple Pacific locations: Hawaii, Fiji, and Samoa, supplemented by soundstage work in Australia. Choosing to film on genuine locations carried substantial weight. Numerous Disney live-action conversions have depended extensively on virtual production methodologies, The Lion King and The Little Mermaid serving as primary illustrations, and while those pictures achieved remarkable visual outcomes, they periodically felt clinical or synthetic. Through filming upon actual coastlines, within actual waters enveloped by authentic tropical flora, the live-action Moana achieves a physical dimensionality that its forerunners frequently lacked. When Moana traverses the beach, genuine sand is visible between her toes. When surf pounds against the coastline, the sensation of salt becomes nearly tangible. It grounds the supernatural components of the narrative within material existence, rendering the enchantment more enchanting through juxtaposition. Now, let's examine the supporting performers, since this picture has gathered a truly remarkable collection of talent. Beyond the central figures I've previously detailed, several actors register strongly in more contained parts. Hualalai Chung inhabits the role of a young navigator appearing within the broadened storyline, a figure absent from the animated picture. This character functions as a conduit between the island's heritage and its prospects, an individual embodying the seafaring tradition that Moana strives to resurrect. Chung carries a measured intensity into the part that provides appealing counterpoint to Moana's more externalized resolve. There's additionally the matter of Tamatoa, the enormous, treasure-fixated coconut crab dwelling within the realm of monsters. In the animated picture, Tamatoa received his voice from Jermaine Clement and ranked among the most unforgettable figures in the movie, primarily owing to the spectacular musical showcase, Shiny. In the live-action interpretation, Tamatoa materializes through a blend of puppetry work, animatronic engineering, and computer-generated enhancement, and the voice. Well, I'll withhold the identity of who provides it for now, though I can confirm the filmmakers plainly recognized that Tamatoa demanded spectacle. The realm of monsters passage ranks among the most visually daring in the picture, a neon-saturated, bioluminescent subterranean chamber resembling the product of a hallucinatory vision, crafted by someone who'd been studying abyssal organisms for entirely too long. It's stunning, peculiar, and represents exactly the category of creative gamble the picture needed to undertake to earn its place alongside the original. The Kakamora, those diminutive coconut-armored raiders who assault Moana and Maui's vessel in the animated picture, likewise appear in the live-action interpretation, reconceived through an approach that's authentically inventive. Rather than attempting to fabricate photorealistic miniature combatants, which would have appeared absurd, the picture employs an alternative strategy that I believe functions splendidly. I prefer not to divulge excessive detail, though I'll note that the Kakamora passage constitutes one of the most entertaining combat sequences across any Disney picture in recent memory. It's propulsive, amusing, resourceful, and demonstrates Kale's capacity to orchestrate intricate sequences with both precision and vigor. Let me explore the performances with greater depth now, since I believe this represents the area where the picture most decisively separates itself from certain other Disney live-action conversions. Catherine Laga'aia, as I've mentioned, excels as Moana. What I wish to underscore is her handling of the musical passages, given that this constitutes a musical and the songs form an essential component of the overall experience. The original animated Moana featured an extraordinary score with compositions crafted by Lin-Manuel Miranda, Opataya Fawai, and Mark Mancina. How Far I'll Go achieved instant classic standing, You're Welcome became a cultural touchstone, and We Know the Way produced shivers with each listening. The live-action picture preserves every one of these compositions while introducing several fresh entries, and Laga'aia commands the vocal range necessary to serve the material justice. Her interpretation of How Far I'll Go diverges from Cravalho's delivery, and that divergence is entirely appropriate. Where Cravalho's rendition possessed crystalline purity and soaring elevation, Laga'aia's version carries earthier weight, greater rootedness. The yearning registers audibly within her voice, though equally perceptible is the gravity of responsibility. She doesn't merely wish to cross beyond the reef. The compulsion runs deeper, and that imperative is tempered through guilt and hesitation. It constitutes a more layered vocal interpretation, and while certain devotees of the original may favor the animated presentation, I believe Laga'aia claims the composition as distinctly her own through a manner that feels simultaneously respectful and invigorating. Johnson's delivery of You're Welcome predictably generates tremendous enjoyment. The man possesses innate understanding of how to command an audience, even when that audience consists of a camera and a verdant backdrop. The composition has undergone mild restructuring for the live-action presentation, featuring expanded orchestral textures and supplementary lyrics that elaborate upon Maui's personal history. Johnson won't claim a Grammy for his vocal execution. Let's maintain honest expectations, though that misses the essential point. You're Welcome functions as a performance showcase, a platform for personality and magnetic appeal, and Johnson possesses those attributes in considerable abundance. The movement design accompanying the number also demonstrates inventiveness, weaving Maui's shape-shifting capacities into the staging through approaches that dazzle visually, without submerging the composition itself. The fresh compositions crafted by Miranda, Fawai, and Mancina produce uneven results. One specifically, a contemplative piece for Grammatala, positioned immediately preceding a significant narrative development, achieves genuine emotional depth and may actually represent the strongest composition in the entire picture. It's a hushed, introspective work examining the ocean as a repository of memories, exploring how water preserves the narratives of every soul who has ever traversed its surface. House delivers it magnificently, with an apparent simplicity that conceals the composition's emotional intricacy. Another fresh composition, a more spirited number occurring during Moana's preparations for departure, catches the ear readily, yet feels marginally misaligned in terms of atmosphere. It entertains, though it interrupts the accumulating dramatic pressure of the opening act in a fashion that doesn't fully succeed. I should additionally reference the orchestral score, arranged by Mark Mancina, incorporating elements from Hawaii. The score achieves lushness and immersion, merging Western symphonic conventions with Polynesian musical traditions through a synthesis that registers as organic rather than contrived. Passages exist where percussion alone carries the emotional substance of a given sequence, especially throughout the maritime scenes, and the incorporation of authentic Polynesian instrumentation contributes an integrity that elevates the complete picture. The score demonstrates awareness of when grandeur and expansiveness serve the moment, and when restraint and silence communicate more effectively. Achieving that equilibrium proves considerably more challenging than casual observation might suggest, and Mancina strikes it with precision. Now let's penetrate to the substance of the narrative, the storyline architecture, the revelations, the emotional trajectory, and genuinely scrutinize how the live-action interpretation extends and departs from the animated source. I should indicate that I'll be examining the complete storyline here, so anyone who hasn't experienced the picture and prefers to approach it without foreknowledge should consider this their notification. The opening act of the picture undergoes significant expansion relative to the animated original. We invest considerably more time upon Motunui, and this represents an entirely constructive development. The animated picture progressed through the Motunui passages with relative efficiency. We received the background regarding Te Fiti, the presentation of Moana and her family, and the catalyzing circumstances, the environmental decay, Tala's disclosure, Moana's resolution to depart, all compressed within approximately the initial 20 minutes. The live-action interpretation requires closer to 40 minutes to arrive at the corresponding juncture, and those supplementary minutes overflow with character elaboration, environmental establishment, and understated moments that generate returns later throughout the picture. We observe Moana functioning as a leader in preparation, absorbing the obligations accompanying her station as a chief's daughter. We watch her engaging with fellow islanders, mediating disagreements, contributing to the harvest, participating in shared rituals. These passages establish Moana not exclusively as a visionary longing to discover the ocean, but as a capable, empathetic leader who authentically concerns herself with her community's welfare. Her determination to depart the island doesn't constitute an evasion of duty. It embodies an embrace of a distinct form of duty, one demanding she travel farther than anyone has ventured across multiple generations. We additionally receive extended engagement with Sina, Moana's mother, portrayed by Frankie Adams, the New Zealand performer of Samoan heritage, recognized primarily for her contribution to The Expanse. Adams introduces warmth and resilience to Sina that transforms her beyond the merely encouraging maternal presence she represented in the animated picture. A passage exists where Sina settles beside Moana upon the shore and discusses the experience of womanhood within their society, the anticipations placed upon them, the concessions required, the quiet authority that emerges from sustaining both family and community. It's a passage that risked becoming didactic, yet Adams and Laga'aia execute it with such unforced authenticity that it registers as a genuine exchange between mother and daughter rather than a constructed moment engineered to transmit a particular message. The relationship binding Sina and Tui likewise receives heightened examination. In the animated picture, they were essentially depicted as a unified position, both desiring Moana to remain upon the island, both invested in her succession as chief. The live-action interpretation introduces complexity into this partnership. Sina, we discover, maintains her own complicated relationship with the sea. She hasn't harbored aspirations of voyaging. She's never desired to navigate past the reef. Yet she comprehends the magnetic force the ocean exercises upon certain individuals. She perceives it within Moana, and she recognizes it in Tui's determined resistance against it. A nuanced yet commanding passage exists where Sina observes Moana contemplating the ocean, and instead of summoning her back or cautioning her, she simply produces a smile, a contained, melancholy, comprehending smile, conveying everything about Sina's position without requiring a single syllable. She recognizes Moana will eventually go. She's always recognized this, and she's reconciling herself with that certainty. The environmental degradation menacing Motunui receives more visceral rendering in the live-action interpretation. In the animated picture, we observed withered vegetation and barren fishing nets. Competent visual shorthand, though somewhat conceptual. Here, the deterioration advances before our eyes in real progression. Coconuts fracture open, exposing darkened, fetid interiors. Fish surface upon the shoreline, lifeless and bearing unnatural discoloration. The plant life bordering the island commences its withering, verdant coloring, draining from foliage until only a diseased gray-brown remains. A passage occurs where a child selects fruit from a branch, bites into it, and immediately ejects it. The interior has corrupted despite the exterior maintaining appearances. It's a compact detail, yet it communicates the situation's urgency through visceral impact. The encroaching darkness isn't merely approaching. It has already established its presence. Grandma Tala's function throughout the opening act undergoes expansion as well, and this represents territory where the picture accomplishes some of its finest emotional craftsmanship. In the animated picture, Tala embodied the unconventional grandmother who moved alongside stingrays and recounted tales of ancestral practices. She inspired devotion, though her characterization remained somewhat singular. The live-action interpretation grants her additional dimensionality. We discover that Tala possessed rebellious inclinations during her younger years. A woman who aspired to voyage, who envisioned the boundless ocean, who received refusal from her own parents and from the customs of her people. She ultimately accepted that refusal, though the dreaming never ceased. And she perceives in Moana the realization of the aspiration she herself could never pursue. A retrospective passage exists, captured with considerable artistry, revealing a youthful Tala positioned at the reef's perimeter, contemplating the ocean, before turning back toward the island. It mirrors the identical composition we'll subsequently observe Moana occupying, though where Moana will advance forward, Tala retreats backward. It's a visual correspondence that reverberates across the picture's duration, introducing a dimension of wistful longing to everything Tala expresses and undertakes. When she discloses the reality concerning the heart of Te Fiti and urges Moana forward, she isn't merely dispatching her granddaughter upon a mission. She's dispatching a fragment of her own spirit, the portion that perpetually desired departure yet never achieved it. The passage surrounding Tala's departure is managed with extraordinary tenderness. In the animated picture, it registered as sorrowful, though somewhat compressed. Tala falls ill. She transfers the heart to Moana. Moana sets forth, and we observe Tala's essence manifesting as a manta ray, steering her granddaughter through the reef. The live-action interpretation extends this passage and saturates it with such authentic feeling that surviving it dry-eyed would surprise me greatly. House's work throughout this passage is extraordinary. Tala doesn't expire with theatrical flourish. She gradually diminishes. She reclines upon her sleeping mat, her family gathered around, and she shares narratives. She speaks of the sea, of the ancient navigators, of the legendary wayfinders who charted courses by celestial guidance. As she speaks, her voice progressively softens. The illumination within the space appears to transform, and the sounds of the ocean beyond grow more prominent, as though the waters themselves are reaching for her. Then she turns toward Moana and delivers something, a fresh passage of dialogue absent from the animated picture, that I suspect may constitute the most magnificent sentence in the complete production. I'll refrain from reproducing it here because it merits discovery within its proper setting, though its essence concerns the ocean's nature not as something that removes people, but as something that propels them onward. And then she's departed. The progression from Tala's passing to Moana's embarkation flows without interruption. Moana races toward the water, the heart of Te Fiti pressed tightly in her grasp, and the ocean ascends to greet her. In the animated picture, this represented a moment of pure triumph. How Far I'll Go returns. The musical accompaniment builds, and Moana sails forth upon a surge of conviction. The live-action interpretation calibrates it with different emphasis. Triumph exists, certainly, yet grief accompanies it. Tears track down Moana's face as she runs. She departs, not purely seeking adventure. She departs because remaining means witnessing the slow death of everything precious to her. The musical accompaniment maintains restraint initially, constructing gradually as Moana pushes through the reef barrier into exposed waters. Only when she clears the reef entirely, when the immeasurable expanse of the Pacific reveals itself before her, does the accompaniment achieve its complete crescendo. Even at that apex, a momentary glance back toward the island interrupts, merely an instant, before she redirects her attention toward the distant edge of sky-meeting sea. The ocean itself functions as a distinct character within this picture, replicating its role from the animated rendition, and the manner of its live-action realization genuinely impresses. In the animated picture, the ocean exhibited playfulness and caprice, a conscious aquatic entity that selected Moana and facilitated her passage. The live-action interpretation maintains this characterization while introducing a stratum of mystical depth that renders the ocean more akin to a sentient elemental force rather than an amiable animated presence. The aquatic effects achieve stunning results. When the ocean extends toward Moana, physically shaping a hand or tendril to engage with her, it presents an appearance of authenticity that shouldn't prove feasible. Weight inhabits the water, a fluidity confirming the effects department invested extraordinary duration, perfecting the result. The ocean's distinctive temperament communicates clearly: protective, impish, intermittently mischievous, and occasionally displaying something approaching impatience, suggesting an internal monologue along the lines of, "Listen, there's a heart requiring return and valuable time flowing past." The picture's second act, Moana's traversal across the ocean, her encounter with Maui, and their shared mission to restore the heart, represents where the picture derives its greatest entertainment, while simultaneously confronting its most substantial obstacles. The animated rendition of this portion essentially constituted a sequence of spectacular moments linked through the developing connection between Moana and Maui. The live-action interpretation possesses additional binding material, constituting both an advantage and a liability. Positively, the supplementary passages grant the characters expanded territory for development. Negatively, the momentum occasionally decelerates in ways the animated picture never permitted. Moana's landfall upon Maui's island registers as a prominent moment. In the animated picture, she impacts the shore and promptly challenges Maui. The live-action interpretation introduces a brief interlude where Moana surveys the island before discovering Maui. And this investigation reveals the full duration of Maui's isolation. The island bears scattered improvised constructions, crude shelters, beacon fires, rudimentary implements, all displaying varying degrees of deterioration. Certain structures appear recent. Others present the appearance of centuries-old relics. It functions as visual condensation for Maui's eternal existence and his profound solitude, and it accomplishes this effectively. When we ultimately observe Maui, he doesn't immediately present the exuberant, self-promoting figure we anticipate. A brief interval occurs, merely a heartbeat, where we perceive him before he detects Moana's presence, and he occupies a stone, his attention fixed upon the ocean, his enchanted fishhook resting beside him, and his expression communicates vacancy, not precisely sorrow, but hollowness, the expression belonging to someone who has existed in isolation so extensively that the sensation of companionship has become a forgotten memory. Then Moana materializes, and the protective exterior reasserts itself. The swagger resurfaces. The witticisms commence. "You're welcome" launches, and performance begins. Yet the picture has introduced a seed during that unguarded instant, and it generates beautiful returns subsequently when Maui's defensive structures collapse and the authentic self beneath emerges. Johnson's physical preparation for the part has generated considerable commentary. The man already possesses tremendous stature that simply describes his natural condition, though for Maui, supplementary visual augmentation was employed to render him even more massive and formidable. His body art combines practical cosmetic application and digital enhancement, and the animated tattoo of Mini Maui relies entirely upon computer generation, yet integrates so organically that awareness of the technique fades within moments. Mini Maui's responses to unfolding events supply an ongoing commentary that maintains consistent amusement without creating interference. One particular instance, during a fraught exchange where Maui fabricates regarding his underlying motivations, features Mini Maui executing such a theatrical facepalm that collective laughter erupted throughout the auditorium. It exemplifies precisely the variety of modest, personality-driven comedy that Disney executes more skillfully than virtually any competitor. The passage where Moana and Maui recover the fishhook from Tamatoa within the realm of monsters constitutes, as I referenced previously, one of the picture's visual triumphs. Yet it simultaneously represents a critical character development junction. In the animated picture, Maui required the fishhook to activate his shape-shifting capacity, and the expedition to the realm of monsters essentially operated as a retrieval operation. The live-action interpretation elaborates upon this by transforming the realm of monsters into a more comprehensively conceived environment. It doesn't function merely as a cavern. It constitutes an entire subterranean domain, a territory where abandoned deities and forsaken spirits reside. The visual conception draws substantially from Polynesian mythology's interpretation of the underworld, and the production design collective has fabricated something authentically unearthly. Bioluminescent vegetation illuminates cavern surfaces. Organisms resembling specimens extracted from the Pacific's most profound abysses drift through the atmosphere like animate fossils. And positioned centrally, atop his accumulation of precious metals and valuables, reclines Tamatoa. Tamatoa within this interpretation represents an event unto himself. He's colossal. He's ostentatious. He alternates between menacing and comedic with equal conviction. The performance, and I'll confirm now that the voice performer contributes something genuinely exceptional to the character, captures the original figure's self-absorption and theatrical flair, while introducing a dimension of threat that the animated rendition merely implied. Shiny receives complete performance, reimagined as a fully produced musical spectacle with visual effects transforming the realm of monsters into a psychedelic entertainment venue. It's lavish and immoderate and thoroughly magnificent. The composition itself has undergone modest revision, incorporating fresh lyrics and a bridge segment absent from the original, and the result succeeds. It simply succeeds completely. The melody will inhabit your consciousness for extended periods. Beyond the visual splendor, however, the realm of monsters' passage fulfills a significant narrative function. Within this environment, Moana validates herself, not merely as someone bearing a supernatural artifact and a predetermined destiny, but as an astute, ingenious individual capable of improvisational thinking under duress. In the animated picture, Moana's scheme to divert Tamatoa maintained relative simplicity. In the live-action interpretation, it possesses greater elaboration, demanding she employ her oceanic knowledge, her comprehension of optical properties, and her absolute audacity to outsmart an entity that has existed across millennia. It represents the juncture where Maui ceases regarding her as an irritation and begins recognizing her as an equal, and that transition earns its validity through demonstrated action rather than stated conversation. The picture's combat sequences generally demonstrate careful construction. Kale may originate from theatrical foundations, yet he exhibits assured command over cinematic action. The Kakamora assault, which I referenced previously, distinguishes itself, a propulsive creative passage exploiting the maritime setting to generate spatial turbulence that thrills rather than bewilders. The camera sweeps and plunges, tracking the action with smoothness and accuracy. A particular shot during this passage, an extended continuous capture following Moana as she evades incoming objects, swings across rigging, and vaults between vessels, genuinely astonishes. Whether it constitutes an authentic single capture or a digital assembly, the impact remains identical. You experience proximity to her position, and the excitement coursing through proves tangible. The engagement with Te Ka, the volcanic demon, serves as the picture's culminating spectacular passage, and here the live-action medium genuinely demonstrates its full capability. Te Ka within the animated picture possessed impressive design qualities, yet remained somewhat conceptual, a turbulent configuration of flame and mineral. The live-action Te Ka represents an altogether different creature. She's immense, towering above the vessels and the ocean itself, and her conception achieves greater definition, greater organic presence. Facial features emerge from the molten surface, contorted through fury and suffering, and intervals occur where the flame subsides briefly, revealing the stone beneath, suggesting what Te Ka formerly embodied before her heart was taken. It represents design that communicates narrative even prior to the plot delivering its disclosure. And that disclosure, the revelation that Te Ka and Te Fiti are the identical being, that the volcanic demon and the island deity share the same existence, reshaped through the deprivation of her heart, constitutes the emotional summit of the picture, precisely as it functioned in the animated rendition. Yet the live-action interpretation addresses this juncture with a degree of emotional refinement that elevates it beyond the source material. In the animated picture, Moana grasps the truth, traverses the exposed seabed toward Te Ka, and delivers a condensed reprise of "I am Moana" while returning the heart. It's a gorgeous passage. The live-action interpretation renders it sublime. Laga'aia's work throughout this passage represents the picture's finest acting. When she divides the ocean and advances toward Te Ka, the motion transcends simple walking. She's approaching an entity capable of annihilating her instantaneously, and this awareness registers clearly. Fear manifests through her physical bearing. Her hands exhibit visible tremoring. Her footsteps lack certainty. Yet forward progress continues, and as proximity increases, her voice rises in song. The lyrics accompanying "Know Who You Are," the composition scoring this passage, replicate those from the animated picture, though Laga'aia delivers them carrying a rawness that Cravalho's rendition didn't entirely access. And I offer this observation with complete appreciation for Cravalho's superb vocal contribution in the original. A fracture passes through Laga'aia's voice, a moment where the pitch nearly disintegrates, and its perfection lies precisely in its authenticity. This represents a young woman experiencing simultaneous terror and depletion and mourning and valor, extending mercy toward an entity that the wider world has rejected. She doesn't vanquish Te Ka. She acknowledges her. She perceives the divine within the monstrous and invites remembrance of original identity. The metamorphosis of Te Ka returning to Te Fiti constitutes visual magnificence naturally. Flame withdrawing, mineral transforming to verdant growth, botanical life emerging, the ocean rushing to reclaim vacated space, though what generates its effectiveness is the emotion undergirding the spectacle. Moana positions the heart, and Te Fiti's eyes reveal themselves, and momentarily the deity and the young woman regard each other, and a communion surpassing verbal expression transpires between them. Te Fiti extends one hand, enormous digits touching Moana's face with extraordinary delicacy, and gratitude, grief, liberation, and devotion all transit between them within that solitary gesture. It represents the variety of moment that persists in consciousness well beyond the credit's conclusion. The picture's concluding resolution receives modest expansion, relative to the animated rendition. Following Te Whiti's restoration and the blight's dissipation, Moana returns to Motunui, accompanied by a gorgeous passage depicting the island's revitalization. Deceased vegetation flowers. Fish reclaim the reef. Coconuts present robust health once more. The community of Motunui celebrates, complemented by a magnificent aerial composition revealing the island encircled by transparent waters, the reef abundant with vitality, presenting the appearance of a canvas brought to animation. Though the genuine emotional reward materializes within the reunion between Moana and her parents. Tui, who invested the complete picture terrified of the ocean and what it might claim from him, observes his daughter's vessel approaching the shore, and his reaction carries complexity. Relief, she survived. Satisfaction, she accomplished what remained beyond his capability. And apprehension, because recognition arrives that she's been altered, that the ocean now inhabits her being in a manner that will never describe his own experience. And this realization demands that he release his hold. Morrison executes this passage with contained emotion, producing deep impact. He doesn't collapse emotionally. He doesn't vocalize loudly. He simply walks to where water meets land, waits as Moana reaches the shore, and embraces her. Within that embrace, accumulated years of anxiety and remorse and devotion release simultaneously. The concluding passage of the picture creates correspondence with the opening. Moana positions herself at the reef's boundary, though this instance replaces outward-looking desire with preparations to guide a flotilla of wayfarers. The community of Motunui has recovered their identity as navigators, and they're embarking to investigate the Pacific, to restore connections with additional islands and communities that their forebears once recognized. Moana surveys the island behind, then redirects toward the horizon ahead, and a smile surfaces. The perspective broadens, revealing the assembled fleet of vessels, their fabric catching the breeze and the ocean extending without boundary before them. Musical accompaniment builds, "We Know the Way," and credits commence. It constitutes a faultless conclusion, and the picture earns every element of it. Each component of the picture, every character exchange, every spectacular passage, every composition, has been constructing toward this singular image. A young woman, informed she lacked permission to venturing forth regardless. A community instructed they must remain stationary, setting sail. A narrative that returns to its point of origin, yet arrives at an altered destination. That's the function of effective narrative art, and the live-action Moana, despite its imperfections, and imperfections exist, which we'll examine, accomplishes precisely this. Allow me to discuss the visual approach of the picture, since it constitutes a substantial element of the experience meriting detailed examination. The cinematography comes from Linus Sandgren, the Swedish cinematographer who earned an Academy Award for La La Land, and has additionally captured First Man, No Time to Die, and multiple other visually distinctive productions. Sandgren introduces a painterly sensibility to the imagery, distinguishing this picture from alternative Disney live-action conversions. Where numerous such pictures selected naturalistic, nearly documentary-style visual methodology, Moana pursues something carrying greater stylization. Colors achieve saturation, not to the threshold of fantasy, yet surpassing what standard live-action pictures typically present. Ocean blues possess heightened depth. Island verdancy achieves fuller richness. The amber and crimson tones of twilight passages attain greater intensity. It generates a visual quality bridging the separation between live action and animated formats, maintaining awareness that this remains fundamentally a narrative rooted within legend and enchantment. Sandgren's employment of natural illumination proves particularly notable. Numerous daylight passages were captured utilizing available luminosity, producing warmth and softness, registering as genuinely organic. Interior passages upon Motunui, within the chief's assembly structure inside Tala's dwelling, carry golden amber characteristics, rendering the environments intimate and authentically inhabited. Ocean passages, through contrast, employ cooler palettes, featuring blues and silvers and whites, emphasizing the sea's magnitude and authority. A purposeful visual distinction between terrestrial warmth and aquatic coolness operates, reinforcing the thematic friction between domesticity and exploration, powering Moana's expedition. Illumination transforms dramatically throughout the realm of Monsters' Passage. Sandgren abandons natural light entirely here, operating within a palette of neon violets, electric sapphire, and phosphorescent emerald. It represents a courageous determination generating visual disruption, the sensation of departing the recognizable world entirely, entering something primordial and alien. The lighting, accompanying shiny, demonstrates particular inventiveness, employing practical light sources, luminescent mineral formations within the set, reflective surfaces across Tamatoa's carapace, producing a prismatic effect simultaneously absurd and gorgeous. The Teka Passage defines itself through juxtaposition. Prevailing hues consist of obsidian and amber, molten rock and darkness, establishing visual terrain, conveying apocalyptic atmosphere. Yet, as Moana approaches and her voice rises, subtle illumination adjustments signal transformation in progress. The amber softens its intensity. Rosy and violet shades commence infiltration at the composition's periphery. By the moment the heart achieves restoration and Te Fiti awakens, the display has erupted into verdancy, a green so vivid and animated that the color itself appears to respirate. It demonstrates masterful deployment of chromatic elements as narrative instruments, and Sandgren merits substantial recognition for the achievement. The picture's duration approximates 2 hours and 18 minutes, rendering it appreciably longer than the animated rendition's hour and 47 minutes. That supplementary half-hour represents simultaneously an asset and a liability. Positively, it provides the picture space for respiration, permitting characters fuller development and the world richer investigation. Negatively, instances arise, especially within the second act, where momentum diminishes beyond ideal thresholds. A stretch occupying the picture's middle section, following Maui and Moana's fishhook recovery, yet preceding the climactic engagement with Taka, registers as slightly underdeveloped. The picture introduces a subsidiary narrative thread concerning Maui's efforts to reacquire shape-shifting proficiency, and while this generates several entertaining moments, his unsuccessful metamorphosis attempts produce reliable comedy. It simultaneously postpones the primary narrative's forward thrust. In the animated rendition, this portion maintained greater compression and concentration. The live-action interpretation meanders somewhat, and the duration becomes perceptible. Comparably, Certain fresh motunui passages, while individually successful, contribute toward an opening act that particular viewers may experience as deliberate. Approaching this picture with expectations calibrated to the animated rendition's efficient tempo may result in periodic awareness of elapsed time during the extended island passages. Personally, I discovered them gratifying. I appreciated the extended immersion within the community, and I consider the supplementary character development generates returns later, though I recognize alternative perspectives may differ. Allow me to confront the central question directly. Does the live-action Moana constitute a success? The response, I believe, is affirmative, accompanied by conditions. Commercially, the picture has delivered robust performance. Its theatrical premiere generated substantial box office figures propelled by the convergence of Disney's institutional recognition, Dwayne Johnson's audience magnetism, and authentic viewer attachment to the original. The inaugural weekend demonstrated impressive strength, and positive audience reception suggests the picture will sustain momentum. Whether it achieves the financial peaks of Disney's most substantial live-action conversions remains uncertain, though it plainly avoids any characterization as a commercial disappointment. Critically, the reception has demonstrated greater subtlety. The picture currently maintains a creditable, though not exceptional, standing on review compilation platforms, and the critical consensus appears organized around several focal observations. Most evaluators concur that the performances achieve excellence, with Laga'aia's Moana and Morrison's Tui attracting specific commendation. The visual architecture and cinematography have received broad appreciation. The musical elements, encompassing both preserved compositions and fresh additions, have generated favorable responses. And the picture's approach to Polynesian heritage, its deference, its genuineness, its willingness to venture deeper than the animated rendition, has been acknowledged as among its most formidable attributes. The objections, where they surface, tend to concentrate upon several territories. First, the pacing concerns I've described. Second, the foundational inquiry regarding whether this picture requires existence. The animated Moana approaches perfection, visually magnificent, emotionally compelling, culturally momentous. Reinterpreting it through live action inescapably generates the question, for what purpose? What does this rendition provide that the source didn't? The live-action picture supplies multiple responses to this inquiry. The expanded character examination, the deepened cultural investigation, the pure visual spectacle of witnessing these environments and beings rendered in substantially photorealistic manner. Though for certain evaluators, those responses prove insufficient to validate the undertaking. Third, and this criticism extends across numerous Disney live-action conversions, the picture periodically struggles with tonal consistency. The animated Moana inhabited an elevated reality where a conscious ocean, a colossal luminescent crustacean, and a metamorphosing demigod all cohabited without generating friction. The live-action picture, through its photorealistic visual methodology, occasionally produces tension between the supernatural components and the naturalistic environment. When the ocean shapes a hand to engage with infant Moana, the effect charms within animation, yet registers as mildly unsettling in live-action presentation. When Maui converts into a hawk, the passage between Johnson's corporeal presence and the digitally rendered raptor achieves seamlessness from a technical perspective, yet produces slight disruption from a narrative one. These represent modest concerns, and the majority of viewers will likely neither register nor concern themselves with them, though they speak to a broader challenge confronting all live-action fantasy productions. The more convincingly realistic the world appears, the more challenging integrating enchantment becomes without generating perceptual disconnect. Allow me to examine the picture's virtues with greater specificity, since I prefer the criticisms not to eclipse what the picture accomplishes effectively, which encompasses considerable territory. Foremost and fundamentally, this represents a picture approaching Polynesian heritage with authentic deference and reverence. This doesn't constitute cultural exploitation. This isn't a Western production facility appropriating exotic visual elements to adorn an interchangeable heroic narrative. The creative team consulted extensively with cultural specialists, community leaders, and knowledge keepers from across the Pacific, and that consultation manifests within every frame. The navigational methods depicted in the picture maintain accuracy. The ceremonial chants and traditional compositions receive performance from actual Polynesian artists. The societal frameworks and interpersonal dynamics within the Motunui community reflect authentic Pacific Islander customs. The mythology receives presentation not as charming, antiquated tales, but as a vital spiritual practice shaping how these individuals comprehend themselves and their world. This cultural faithfulness extends through the performer selection. Every consequential role in the picture receives performance from a person of Polynesian heritage, and this carries enormous significance. It transcends mere representation, though that independently holds importance. It concerns the performances themselves being informed through lived cultural understanding. When Laga'aia executes a traditional dance during a ceremonial passage, observation reveals she isn't performing choreography. She's practicing something she possesses intimate knowledge of, something constituting her heritage. When Morrison delivers an address to the Motunui community regarding obligation and tradition, gravity accompanies his words emerging from something beyond accomplished technique. It originates from authentic relationship with the principles he articulates. Such authenticity resists fabrication, and reproduction through performers lacking equivalent cultural foundation proves impossible. Second, the picture achieves exceptional results, deepening its characters beyond the animated versions. I've previously examined Moana, Tui, and Tala extensively, though even the more modestly positioned characters benefit from the expanded duration. Pua, the pig, exceeds the designation of adorable companion. He constitutes a presence with distinctive temperament and instances of legitimate comedy. Hai, the phenomenally unintelligent rooster, produces even greater amusement in live-action presentation than within animation, substantially because the contrast between his vacant-eyed obliviousness and the authentically hazardous circumstances he blunders into receives heightening through the naturalistic visual approach. A persistent comedic thread involving Hai and the heart of Te Fiti, he perpetually swallows it, generated comedy within the animated rendition, yet somehow amplifies here, presumably because observing an actual, well digitally rendered, yet convincingly realistic chicken repeatedly consuming a luminous green gemstone, then displaying bewilderment, possesses inherent comedic properties. Third, The picture's emotional substance proves remarkable. This doesn't constitute a cynically motivated commercial reproduction. The individuals who crafted this picture demonstrably invest in the narrative and its characters, and that investment transmits through the emotional abundance of the completed product. The passages addressing grief, Tala's departure, Maui's personal history, Moana's crisis of confidence upon the ocean's depths, receive treatment demonstrating such sensitivity and precision that they feel appropriate within a prestige dramatic production rather than a Disney musical. And the passages celebrating joy, the compositions, the festivities, the instances of astonishment when Moana encounters something unprecedented and magnificent within the expansive Pacific, generate authentic uplift without descending into sentimentality. Fourth, and this observation may generate debate, I believe the live-action picture genuinely surpasses the animated rendition across several specific domains. The relationship connecting Moana and Maui possesses greater nuance and emotional satisfaction. The antagonism of Te Kā combined with the revelation of Te Fiti achieves more potent staging. The motif of wayfinding, both literal and metaphorical, receives exploration with heightened depth and intellectual rigor. And the conclusion, featuring the canoe fleet embarking into the unknown, resonates with greater emotional force because the picture has invested more substantially in establishing what that moment signifies, not exclusively for Moana, but for her complete community. Now permit me to balance this assessment by examining the shortcomings more comprehensively, since the picture falls considerably short of perfection. The tempo, as I've observed, constitutes the most consequential concern. The picture simply extends beyond what the narrative it conveys demands. The animated rendition communicated essentially the identical narrative within 30 fewer minutes. And while the supplementary content within the live-action rendition largely demonstrates worth, the picture doesn't consistently validate its duration. Passages exist that could sustain trimming without sacrificing essential elements. Transitions linger beyond necessity. Instances arise where the picture appears to appreciate its own aesthetic beauty at the expense of narrative propulsion. These don't represent lethal deficiencies, yet they prevent the picture from achieving the driving, nearly unrelenting forward progression that rendered the animated rendition such an electrifying experience. The computer-generated imagery, while broadly impressive, demonstrates inconsistency. The aquatic effects maintain consistent excellence. Te Kā and Te Fiti achieve stunning realization. Yet certain creature elements, specifically the Kakamora and particular passages involving Maui's animal metamorphoses, register as marginally artificial in a manner that extracts you from the moment. It testifies to the remarkable advancement of visual effects technology that these instances represent the exception rather than the standard, though they remain perceptible, and within a picture requesting acceptance of enchantment and mythology as literal actuality, any fracture within the visual persuasion carries cost. Johnson's work, while entertaining, periodically encounters the picture's emotional aspirations. Within lighter passages, the comedy, the self-promotion, the musical showcases, he excels. Yet, within the more dramatically weighted moments, especially passages where Maui wrestles with his abandonment and his hunger for acceptance, Johnson's execution doesn't entirely achieve the profundity the material demands. His work registers as competent without achieving distinction, and within a picture where fellow performers consistently operate at elevated standards, that differential becomes apparent. This shouldn't suggest Johnson delivers poor work. He doesn't. He maintains charismatic appeal and screen-holding capacity while frequently generating substantial comedy. Yet moments exist where the boundaries of his capabilities become visible, and those moments carry mild disappointment. The fresh musical compositions, as I've observed, generate mixed outcomes. The Tala composition achieves excellence. The preparation number functions acceptably. Yet several additional fresh entries feel superfluous. Compositions existing because the studio desired supplementary musical content to differentiate the live-action rendition from the animated one, rather than because the narrative necessitated them. One particularly, a paired vocal between Moana and Maui, occurring during a sailing passage, carries an appealing melody yet features forgettable lyrics, and it disrupts the pacing within a section that should be constructing toward the culmination. And then the foundational question of validation surfaces. Does this picture require existence? The animated Moana represents consummate filmmaking. It demonstrates visual magnificence, emotional authority, cultural consequence, and devotion from millions. What does the live-action rendition contribute that validates its presence? I've contended that it contributes depth, nuance, and cultural authenticity, and I maintain that position. Yet, I simultaneously comprehend the perspective of those who perceive the animated rendition as having already accomplished everything necessary, and who regard the live-action conversion, however well motivated and well crafted, as fundamentally an exercise in superfluity. My personal stance occupies intermediate territory. I consider the live-action Moana a legitimately accomplished picture. I believe it provides sufficient fresh material and emotional substance to validate its existence as an independent artistic creation. I don't consider it superior to the animated rendition. The animated picture's visual artistry, its narrative economy, and its pure capacity for wonder remain without equal. Yet I believe it positions itself alongside the original as a worthy companion work. Should you have treasured the animated Moana, I suspect you'll discover abundant material to value here, even while occasionally wishing the picture had achieved greater compression. And approaching this narrative freshly, without the animated rendition serving as reference, I suspect the experience will generate captivation. Should you view it? Affirmatively, without reservation, not because it achieves flawlessness, but because it demonstrates ambition and sincerity and frequent beauty, because the performances carry strength, because the music achieves splendor, because the cultural embodiment holds meaning and authenticity, because the narrative of a young woman who challenges expectations, crosses the boundary of the known world, and preserves her community never exhausts its relevance, regardless of frequency of telling or the medium employed for its communication. Because a moment exists, and recognition will arrive upon encountering it, when Moana positions herself before Daka and perceives not a monster, but a deity experiencing anguish, and within that moment, the picture achieves something approximating divine grace. That moment independently validates the admission cost. Allow me to redirect attention and examine certain production elements I haven't yet addressed, since considerable territory remains worth exploring. The costume construction, for instance, merits discussion. The garments were conceived by Ngila Dixon, the New Zealand-based designer who earned an Academy Award for The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King. Dixon's contribution here achieves remarkable quality. The attire for the Motunui inhabitants demonstrates detail and cultural precision, incorporating tapa cloth, plumage, marine shells, and botanical pigments through approaches appearing genuine rather than stagecraft. Moana's personal wardrobe progresses throughout the picture. She commences in the more ceremonial dress befitting a chief's daughter and progressively transitions toward the simpler, more utilitarian clothing characteristic of a navigator. And this visual progression mirrors her character development. Upon reaching Te Fiti, she has reduced to fundamentals: an unadorned garment, her grandmother's pendant, and the heart of Te Fiti. Elaborate dress proves unnecessary. She embodies her authentic self, and that suffices. Maui's garments, or their relative absence, considering the character remains predominantly unclothed above the waist, presented their own distinctive obstacles. The body art covering his physique constitutes an essential element of the character's visual identity, requiring authentic appearance while simultaneously incorporating the fantastical dimension of Mini Maui, the animated tattoo. The resolution employed a combination of manually applied temporary designs, freshly administered each filming day, a procedure reportedly consuming 3 to 4 hours, and digital enhancement for the animated Mini Maui passages. The outcome achieves seamlessness. The designs appear integral to Johnson's body, and the cultural import of each individual pattern received thorough investigation and authorization from the Cultural Advisory Group. The physical environment design, supervised by Naomi Shohan, proves equally remarkable. Motunui achieves complete realization as a functioning world, and the set construction for the settlement demonstrates extraordinary craftsmanship. The structures employ traditional materials and construction methods, producing surroundings conveying authentic habitation and organic development. The interior of the chief's assembly structure, featuring carved timber columns and interwoven floor coverings and shell ornamental elements, constitutes a particularly beautiful set, providing backdrop for multiple, emotionally significant passages. The meticulousness extends to the most minute components: culinary implements, fishing apparatus, musical instruments, each fabricated through consultation with Polynesian cultural authorities to guarantee accuracy. The watercraft represent another production design triumph. The canoes utilized throughout the picture constitute actual seaworthy vessels, assembled employing traditional Pacific Islander boat construction methods. Multiple master vessel craftspeople from across the Pacific received engagement to supervise construction, producing a fleet of canoes that not merely appear authentic, they genuinely navigate. The determination to employ practical boats rather than digitally rendered vessels for the sailing passages endows those scenes with texture and reality impossible to generate through digital means. When Moana's vessel cleaves through the swells, cascading water appears across the hull, the canvas snaps within the wind, the outrigger elevates and descends. It's tangible, and it registers as tangible, and that tangibility anchors the supernatural narrative components through a method enhancing overall credibility. Allow me additionally to examine the picture's treatment of navigation, constituting a central thematic element receiving particularly careful attention. Polynesian navigation, wayfinding, ranks among humanity's most extraordinary accomplishments. Pacific Islander navigators traverse thousands of miles across exposed ocean, employing exclusively the celestial bodies, the marine currents, the patterns generated by wave interaction, the behavioral characteristics of avian and aquatic species, and a profound instinctive comprehension of the natural environment. No magnetic compasses, no cartographic documents, no measuring instruments. Merely accumulated knowledge, transmitted across successive generations, and an almost preternatural communion with the ocean and the firmament. The animated Moana acknowledged this, especially within the magnificent We Know the Way passage, though the live-action interpretation extends considerably further. An elaborated passage occurs within the picture's latter portion, where Maui instructs Moana in wayfinding fundamentals, constituting one of the most instructive and emotionally resonant segments within the entire picture. We observe Moana acquiring stellar interpretation skills, not merely identifying celestial groupings, but comprehending how their positioning transforms throughout nocturnal hours and what those transformations communicate regarding latitude and bearing. We observe her developing wave interpretation capability, how swell configurations can disclose the presence of distant land masses well in advance of their visual appearance upon the horizon. We observe her absorbing avian behavioral patterns, which varieties range extensively from terrestrial proximity and which maintain close association, and what their conduct reveals regarding meteorological conditions and current patterns. These passages risked becoming arid or overly instructional, yet Kyle and the writing team managed them with buoyancy and fascination, rendering them authentically absorbing. Maui proves an effective instructor, displaying unexpected forbearance, possessing a talent for converting sophisticated concepts into vibrant figurative expressions. And Moana demonstrates eager receptivity, her innate intelligence, and her profound oceanic connection, rendering her a rapid learner. A juncture arrives where she successfully charts course toward a designated island, employing exclusively the methods Maui has imparted, and the expression of victory illuminating her features. The recognition that this capability exists within her, that her creation serves this very purpose, constitutes one of the picture's most gratifying instances. The wayfinding motif additionally operates upon a metaphorical plane that the picture explores with sophistication. Moana isn't merely acquiring oceanic navigation. She's learning to navigate her personal identity, her position within the broader world, the friction between externally imposed expectations and internally sensed truth. The celestial bodies guiding her passage across water simultaneously guide her toward authentic self-knowledge. The wave patterns she learns to interpret correspond to the emotional surges of uncertainty and apprehension and aspiration crashing against her throughout the narrative. It constitutes metaphor that risked heavy-handedness, yet the picture integrates it so naturally within the narrative framework that forced sensation never materializes. I wish to dedicate attention to the maritime passages themselves, since they constitute the picture's visual centerpiece and represent an authentic, technical accomplishment. Maritime filming carries notorious difficulty. Illumination transforms perpetually. Conditions resist prediction. Logistics present nightmarish complications, and equipment damage risks remain ever present. The live-action Moana reportedly constituted one of the most demanding productions in Disney's institutional history, with substantial portions captured upon genuine exposed waters, rather than within controlled aquatic environments or against synthetic backdrops. The outcomes validate the difficulty encountered. The ocean within this picture functions as a living, respiratory entity, and its visual presentation achieves incredible standards. The water receives capture across every conceivable illumination condition: dawn, midday, twilight, darkness, storm, tranquility, and each lighting circumstance generates distinctive visual character serving the narrative. Dawn passages carry opalescent quality, entirely pinks and ambers, conveying optimism and fresh commencements. Midday passages present vivid brightness, the ocean displaying deep, nearly impossible azure extending toward the horizon in every direction. Twilight passages radiate warmth and aureate character, the water converting to liquid gold. And the nocturnal passages prove extraordinary. The ocean beneath stellar illumination, with the galactic band reflected upon the water's surface, constitutes one of the most magnificent images I've encountered within any picture. It possesses such immensity and such quietude and such abundance of potential that visceral comprehension emerges regarding Moana's attraction toward it. The tempest passages prove equally compelling, though through an entirely divergent mechanism. When atmospheric conditions deteriorate, the ocean transforms into something monstrous, not Taka, but something more fundamental, more dispassionate. Waves tower above Moana's diminutive vessel. Wind produces howling resonance. Precipitation descends in formations so dense that visibility through them becomes nearly impossible. The acoustic design throughout these passages achieves remarkable quality. Wave impact, vessel stress, wind fury, all stratified and combined, producing an enveloping soundscape positioning you directly within the storm's center. The spray almost registers upon your face. One tempest passage in particular, occurring approximately 2/3 through the picture's duration, following a narrative reversal I'll leave undisclosed, features Moana alone upon the ocean, having lost Maui temporarily, and the heart of Te Fiti, likewise temporarily. She's depleted, she's frightened, and she's interrogating everything: her expedition, her purpose, her sense of self. The ocean, which has served as her supporter throughout the picture, appears to withdraw its assistance, or at minimum to retract its engagement. The water doesn't configure hands or extensions. It provides no aid. It merely exists, immense, dispassionate, formidable, and Moana, solitary at its center, must confront the prospect that she has committed a catastrophic error. This represents the picture's most shadowed interval, and simultaneously its most commanding. Laga'aia's execution here achieves rawness and exposure. She doesn't portray Moana as heroic within this passage. She portrays her as frightened, as disoriented, as a 16-year-old young woman positioned thousands of miles from her home, alone upon a merciless ocean, possessing no certainty regarding whether she'll ever encounter her family again. And when she ultimately fractures, when tears arrive and convulsive grief shakes her slight frame, and she whispers, without shouting, her inability to continue, the devastation proves complete, because the picture's entirety has been devoted to observing her demonstrate bravery and determination and competence, and witnessing her nada renders her eventual ascension proportionally more commanding. The recovery from this moment, Moana's communion with her grandmother's spirit, her renewed dedication to the mission, her defiant proclamation of identity, constitutes the picture's emotional fulcrum. In the animated rendition, this passage accompanied the composition I Am Moana, Song of the Ancestors, and the live-action interpretation preserves the composition while expanding the surrounding passage. We observe Moana submerged. She's descended beneath the surface, and the camera accompanies her downward into a domain existing as neither the physical ocean nor the realm of monsters, but something intermediate, something belonging to the spiritual plane. Within those depths, she encounters the essences of the ancient navigators, her forebears, the men and women who sailed these waters across millennia. They manifest as luminescent forms within the water, translucent and iridescent, and they produce no speech. They simply exist. Their presence communicates to Moana that isolation has never described her condition, that the ocean has perpetually accompanied her, because her ancestors have perpetually accompanied her. Then Tala materializes, not manifesting as a manta ray upon this occasion, but as her own self, youthful and vital and possessed of the spirited energy we witnessed within the earlier retrospective. She communicates minimally. Necessity for extensive speech is absent. She merely regards Moana with affection and satisfaction, and Moana reciprocates the gaze, and something transmits between them that verbal expression cannot capture. Moana surfaces. She draws breath. She establishes her heading, and departure follows. It represents filmmaking at its apex. It genuinely does. Allow me to shift focus and examine something that has occupied my attention throughout this discussion, specifically the wider context of Disney's live-action conversion strategy and the position the Moana conversion occupies within it. Disney has been systematically reconverting their animated masterworks into live-action formats across more than a decade, and the strategy has generated enormous financial returns. The live-action Beauty and the Beast accumulated over $1.2 billion in worldwide receipts. The Lion King, which was technically an animated production designed to simulate live-action photography, though the distinction seems somewhat academic, generated $1.6 billion. Aladdin surpassed the $1 billion threshold. Even the less commercially dominant entries, Mulan, Dumbo, Lady and the Tramp, produced substantial revenue, deriving at least partial benefit from the brand familiarity of the source properties, guaranteeing an established viewer base. Yet commercial achievement and artistic distinction occupy different categories, and the critical reception of these conversions has extended from enthusiastic, Cinderella, The Jungle Book, through moderate, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, to actively antagonistic, The Lion King, Mulan. The objections carry familiarity. These pictures lack necessity. They contribute nothing beyond the originals. They remove the distinctive character and individuality of the animated renditions, favoring sleek, standardized visual presentation, and they embody creative hesitancy from Disney, a willingness to excavate their proprietary archive for guaranteed financial returns rather than committing resources to original narrative development. These objections carry validity, and they apply with varying precision to the live-action Moana. Yet I believe the Moana conversion possesses an advantage that many predecessors lacked: cultural consequence. When Disney reconverted Beauty and the Beast, or The Lion King, the source pictures, regardless of their beloved status, were fundamentally Western narratives communicated from Western perspective. Converting them to live action contributed no distinctive cultural dimension. The exercise remained purely aesthetic, converting animation into photorealistic presentation without meaningfully modifying the substance. Moana occupies different territory. The original animated picture represented Disney's inaugural and, through the present date, singular feature-length picture centering upon Polynesian heritage and mythology. It constituted a landmark within representational history, resonating profoundly with Pacific Islander communities worldwide. The live-action conversion, through deepening the cultural components, through deploying an almost exclusively Polynesian performer and creative roster, and through approaching the source material with even greater reverence and specificity, contributes a dimension of cultural genuineness that authentically validates its creation. This doesn't merely constitute an enhanced aesthetic rendition of the identical picture, it constitutes a more culturally substantial rendition, and that substance carries significance. It additionally carries significance that the commercial performance of this picture will shape Disney's future determinations regarding representation. Should the live-action Moana generate profit, and indications suggest it's producing very substantial profit, it transmits a signal that audiences will appear for narratives centering upon non-Western heritages, communicated with genuineness and deference, presenting performers of diverse backgrounds. That signal carries consequences extending well beyond this individual picture, and it constitutes a signal warranting transmission. That acknowledged, I wish to exercise caution against overstating the picture's representational dimensions, or implying that its significance resides primarily within its cultural importance. The live-action Moana functions first and foremost as a motion picture, and evaluation should proceed based upon its qualities as a motion picture. And upon those qualities, as I've examined comprehensively, it constitutes an accomplished picture. Not an exceptional one, within my assessment, but an accomplished one. Beautifully captured, competently acted, emotionally resonant, and intermittently exciting. It doesn't ascend to the standard set by Disney's finest pictures, though it doesn't require such ascension. Its obligation is to communicate its narrative effectively, and this it accomplishes. Allow me, additionally, to address a matter I've been circling without directly confronting, specifically the question of how this picture relates to the forthcoming Moana 2, the animated continuation that Disney has additionally produced. Without extensively examining the continuation, that represents an entirely separate conversation. Noting that the live-action Moana and the animated continuation inhabit a somewhat unusual relationship proves worthwhile. Both constitute expansions of the source narrative, yet proceeding in divergent directions and through different artistic forms. The live-action picture recommunicates the source narrative with enhanced character examination and cultural precision. The continuation advances the narrative with fresh adventures and fresh characters. Collectively, they embody Disney's endeavor to construct a Moana franchise operating across multiple delivery systems and presentational formats. Whether this franchise construction methodology serves the narrative or weakens it constitutes an unresolved inquiry. Risk exists of excessive exposure, of Moana devolving into merely another Disney commodity subject to exploitation, rather than a distinctive, purposeful narrative possessing commencement, development, and resolution. Yet opportunity equally exists. Opportunity to employ the Moana designation to communicate additional narratives embedded within Polynesian heritage, to present additional Pacific Islander talent both performing before and working behind the camera, and to extend the world construction through methods a solitary picture couldn't accomplish. I maintain guarded optimism. The live-action Moana, regardless of its shortcomings, confirms that the participants involved invest deeply in this narrative and its cultural foundations. Should that investment continue informing subsequent franchise entries, I suspect we could observe something authentically remarkable materializing. I've been discussing this extensively, and I recognize I haven't yet addressed certain more specialized technical dimensions of the picture warranting discussion. The editorial work, for instance, falls under the supervision of Andrew Weisblum, who has collaborated extensively with Wes Anderson and Darren Aronofsky. Weisblum introduces precision into the editorial process that serves the picture effectively during action passages, yet occasionally operates contrarily during the more contemplative intervals. He demonstrates a tendency toward slightly accelerated cutting during quieter passages, as though harboring concern regarding viewer attention retention. Several additional pauses, a sustained close composition here, an extended wide perspective there, would have permitted certain emotional moments to achieve even greater resonance. The acoustic design, as I referenced earlier in passing, achieves exceptional standards. The acoustic team, directed by supervising sound editor Shannon Mills, has constructed an auditory environment as enveloping as the visual one. The maritime sounds, wave percussion, the gentle motion of water against hull surfaces, the profound, nearly sub-frequency resonance of deep oceanic presence, serve as persistent companions throughout the picture, stratified with such precision that the distinction between protected lagoon waters and exposed oceanic conditions registers aurally. The natural sounds characterizing Motunui, avian songs, foliage movement, the crackling of communal fires produce a situational awareness of extraordinary vividness, and the sounds accompanying supernatural elements, the rushing quality of Maui's metamorphoses, the volcanic resonance of Te Ka, the transcendent humming of Te Fiti, receive design to register as extensions of the natural realm, rather than existing independently from it, reinforcing the picture's assertion that magical and ordinary phenomena constitute portions of the identical continuum. The visual effects, managed primarily by Industrial Light and Magic, with supplementary contributions from additional studios, achieve predominantly excellent standards, though, as I observed previously, demonstrate periodic inconsistency. The aquatic effects represent the unmistakable highlight. The ocean constitutes the most persuasive digitally rendered water I've observed in any picture, and the passages where the ocean engages with Moana as a sentient presence achieve remarkably accomplished execution. Te Fiti's metamorphosis constitutes a visual achievement, with botanical growth expanding and distributing across the visual field in accelerated time cascading fashion that's simultaneously gorgeous and scientifically plausible. The growth patterns derive from actual botanical modeling. The bioluminescent components within the realm of monsters receive stunning rendering, with specificity and diversity, suggesting the effects crew invested months studying organisms inhabiting the deep ocean. Where the effects periodically falter involves creature execution. The digitally rendered fauna, Pua the swine, Heiai the fowl, the diverse marine organisms appearing throughout the picture generally persuade yet occasionally descend into the perceptual territory where digital organisms appear nearly authentic yet not entirely so. Heiai achieves the greatest success, likely because the animation designers embrace the character's fundamental absurdity rather than pursuing absolute photographic verisimilitude. Pua achieves lesser success. Instances arise where the swine presents obviously digital qualities, especially within close compositions where epidermal texture and ocular movement don't entirely satisfy scrutiny. Maui's metamorphosis passages receive handling with fluctuating effectiveness. His conversion into a hawk achieves the finest result. The transition from human form to avian presents fluid and visually compelling qualities, and the aerial passages produce exhilaration. His conversion into a shark likewise succeeds, though the subaquatic photography increases difficulty in identifying digital seams. His remaining conversions, a beetle, a reptile, and several others I'll leave unspecified, extend from excellent to adequate, contingent upon the organism's complexity and the quantity of screen duration it occupies. The stunt execution and physical coordination throughout the picture merit acknowledgement as well. Laga'aia completed a significant proportion of her own stunt requirements, encompassing substantial portions of the sailing, swimming, and ascending that the part necessitated. Her physical commitment to the character manifests clearly. A rawness inhabits the action passages achievable exclusively when the performer genuinely executes the physical work rather than yielding to a substitute. A composition during the Te Ka encounter features Moana leaping between rocky formations spanning a molten channel, and Laga'aia's countenance remains visible within the frame, signifying either genuine stunt performance or immaculate digital assembly. Regardless, the result produces excitement. Johnson likewise contributes his considerable physicality to the character. His Maui presents physical dominance extending beyond simple dimension. A dynamism inhabits his locomotion, a managed potency, producing credibility that he could extract land masses from the ocean depths. The combat coordination during the Kakamora encounter demonstrates Johnson's capacity to unite power with nimbleness, and a playfulness characterizes his action passages, distinguishing them from the more forceful confrontations of his Fast and Furious or Jumanji contributions. Allow me, additionally, to examine the picture's deployment of linguistic diversity, since it constitutes a subtle yet substantial production dimension. The picture operates primarily within English, obviously, yet incorporates Samoan, Tokelauan, and additional Polynesian languages through approaches registering as natural rather than performative. Characters transition between English and their ancestral languages with fluidity, occasionally mid-sentence, and the picture trusts its viewers to maintain comprehension without perpetual translation. This multilingual methodology contributes genuineness and texture to the spoken passages, reflecting a determination acknowledging the actual multilingual circumstances of Pacific Islander communities. The ceremonial chants and ritual language receive performance in traditional Polynesian languages without accompanying text translation, and this constitutes a purposeful determination. The creative team has indicated in published conversations that they desired these passages to be processed as sonic and emotional phenomena, rather than as translatable content. Significance conveyed not through literal vocabulary, but through contextual surroundings, melodic quality, the physical execution of the performers, and the spiritual gravity of the depicted traditions. It constitutes a courageous determination, and it succeeds. Comprehending every syllable proves unnecessary to experience the authority of a ceremonial invocation or the tenderness of a lullaby delivered in a mother's ancestral tongue. I wish to address the picture's comedic elements briefly, since they represent an undervalued dimension of the production. The animated Moana achieved consistent, clever humor, and the live-action interpretation maintains that comedy while adapting it toward a live-action sensibility. The broad, physical comedy characterizing the animated rendition, hi-hi consuming inappropriate objects, Maui's unsuccessful metamorphoses, the ocean's playful behavior, remains present though moderately restrained, partially supplanted by more personality-driven comedy emerging from the exchanges between Moana and Maui. Johnson predictably captures the preponderance of laughs. His comedic timing proves excellent, and his readiness to serve as the comedy's target, portraying Maui as authentically fallible and periodically absurd, prevents the character from becoming intolerable. A sustained comedic thread concerning Maui's inability to comprehend why Moana doesn't demonstrate greater awe toward him generates beautiful returns within the third act. And his exchanges with Hei, a figure he manifestly abhors yet cannot successfully eliminate from proximity, supply reliable comedic relief without compromising the dramatic investment. Laga'aia likewise possesses a surprisingly incisive comedic sensibility. Her Moana maintains earnestness and resolve, yet she's simultaneously capable of producing expressionless responses to Maui's grandiosity that achieve precise impact. A passage exists where Maui provides an ornate, self-glorifying monologue cataloging his heroic accomplishments, and Moana merely regards him and inquires, "Have you finished?" with such absolute disengagement that the audience erupted. It constitutes the variety of line admitting numerous potential deliveries, and Laga'aia identifies precisely the correct one. Fatigued, unimpressed, yet carrying the most minimal suggestion of fondness beneath the surface. The comedy additionally succeeds because the picture earns its amusing passages through personality, rather than depending upon contemporary cultural allusions or self-referential commentary. This constitutes a refreshing departure from certain recent Disney productions, which have periodically leaned excessively upon knowing self-awareness. The live-action Moana inhabits its own domain entirely. No structural boundaries receive acknowledgement, no conspiratorial signals toward the audience appear, no jokes require familiarity with the animated rendition to achieve their effect. The comedy develops organically, emerging naturally from the characters and their circumstances, and proves all the more amusing for it. Allow me to conclude by examining the picture's thematic elements, since beneath the entirety of spectacle and musical composition and comedy, the live-action Moana constitutes a profoundly thematic picture, and its themes warrant investigation. The most evident theme concerns identity, specifically the inquiry regarding how we establish self-definition relative to our families, our communities, and our ancestral inheritance. Moana receives instruction throughout the picture regarding who she should become: a chief's daughter, a leader, a guardian of her island. These don't constitute negative designations, and the picture exercises care to avoid dismissing them. Moana doesn't repudiate her identity as a community member, she reinterprets it. She discovers that leadership doesn't necessitate remaining within boundaries established by preceding generations. It demands courage to establish fresh boundaries, to venture further, to chart unprecedented courses. Her identity as a navigator doesn't supplant her identity as a chief's daughter. It renders it complete. Maui's developmental arc mirrors Moana's through fascinating parallels. Maui establishes self-definition through accomplishments: the land masses he elevated, the creatures he vanquished, the endowments he provided humanity. Remove the fishhook and the metamorphic capacity, and terror of insignificance consumes him. His requirement for acclaim and recognition doesn't merely constitute vanity, it represents a response to the foundational trauma of parental rejection. He performs extraordinary acts because he maintains belief that exclusively extraordinary accomplishments can earn affection. Moana instructs him incrementally and without delivering lectures that worthiness of affection doesn't require accomplishment. He merely requires his authentic self. It constitutes a straightforward communication, yet the picture earns it through the precision of its character development, and by the moment Maui appears for the concluding confrontation, not because Moana summoned him, not because demonstration of worth compels him, but because he possesses genuine concern for her. The developmental arc registers as fulfilled and gratifying. The environmental theme additionally warrants recognition. The deterioration threatening Motunui maintains explicit connection to the disruption of natural equilibrium, the theft of Te Fiti's heart. The darkness extending across the ocean functions as metaphor for ecological devastation, for the repercussions of extracting from the natural environment without reciprocating. And the resolution, the heart's restoration, the return of vitality and abundance, functions as metaphor for ecological recovery, for the possibility that damage inflicted upon our world admits reversal, should we possess the discernment and the valor to respond. Within an era defined by atmospheric alteration and environmental emergency, this communication doesn't require subtlety. It requires truthfulness, and truthful it remains. A theme of intergenerational wounding and recovery additionally traverses the picture. Tui's oceanic terror constitutes a trauma response. He survived near drowning that claimed his companion, and his entire adult existence has been devoted to ensuring nobody else undergoes his experience. Within an era defined by atmospheric alteration and environmental emergency, this communication doesn't require subtlety. It requires truthfulness, and truthful it remains. A theme of intergenerational wounding and recovery additionally traverses the picture. Tui's oceanic terror constitutes a trauma response. He survived near drowning that claimed his companion, and his entire adult existence has been devoted to ensuring nobody else undergoes his experience.